Vivian, we saw the pictures. What's the address? We'll be there in an hour, he said on the phone, his voice dripping with entitlement. He thought he was crashing my party, but the truth was, I was listening to his voicemail from 5,000 miles and 17 hours away. My name is Vivian, and this story isn't about the Thanksgiving I had, but about the one my parents were forced to watch unfold on a tiny screen. I picture their morning starting in the suffocating quiet of their suburban house just outside Seattle. The air, thick with the scent of a small, obligatory turkey roasting for two. My father, Martin, would be in his worn armchair, muttering about the state of the world, his voice a low grumble that filled the silence. My mother, Phyllis, would be methodically setting a table for a family that was no longer there, her movements precise, almost robotic, a pantomime of holiday cheer. Then, the moment that changed everything, I can see my mother pausing, scrolling through her phone out of habit, her thumb freezing on the screen. "Martin," she'd whisper, her voice thin. He'd look up, annoyed at the interruption. And there I would be, smiling. Not a polite, strained smile he was used to, but a genuine, radiant beam of pure joy. I was standing in the great room of a breathtaking mountain villa, all glass and warm cedar, with a feast laid out behind me that could feed 30. They wouldn't know where it was, or who I was with. All they knew was that I was living a life they were not a part of. A life they had, in fact, forfeited their right to. If you've ever felt like the forgotten one in your own family, like you are watching life from the outside, just type the city you're watching from in the comments. Let's see how far this silent strength reaches. But to understand that picture, to grasp the decade of silent work that led to that one moment of quiet victory, we have to rewind 10 years. I was 18, and the world felt like it was finally mine. I had a letter of acceptance to my dream architecture program and, more importantly, a trust fund my grandparents had lovingly set up for me before they passed. It was $80,000. To me, it wasn't just money, it was their belief in me, a tangible piece of their love that would build my future. I had my entire life planned out, starting with that fund. One evening, my parents called a family meeting. I remember the sinking feeling in my stomach. Those meetings were never good news for me. They sat me down on the stiff living room sofa and, with expressions of grave importance, told me the money was gone. All of it. They hadn't asked. They had simply taken it, liquidating the entire fund to finance my younger brother Dennis's latest brilliant startup idea, an artisanal scooter company that went bankrupt in 6 months. Dennis needed it now, Vivian. My father said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He has ambition. You're the practical one, you'll figure it out. They didn't see it as theft. They saw it as a reallocation of resources to their favored investment. They had sacrificed my future for his whim. It makes you wonder about the roles we're assigned. Let me know in the comments. Were you the practical one who always had to fix things, or the ambitious one who was always forgiven? I really want to know the balance in this community. The stolen college fund wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the brutal, undeniable climax of the story our family had been writing for years. In this story, there were 2 main characters, assigned roles from birth. My brother, Dennis, was the golden child. I was the scapegoat. He was the sun that the entire family system orbited around, and I was the distant, self-sufficient planet expected to manage my own atmosphere. It was a silent agreement, an unspoken constitution that governed our lives. My straight A's on a report card would earn a simple nod. That's our Vivian, always so responsible. But a C+ from Dennis? That was cause for a celebratory dinner because he really put in the effort this time. When I was 16, I learned how to change a flat tire in the rain on the side of the highway because my parents insisted it was a vital life skill. When Dennis was 22, my mother would drive 40 miles to his apartment to do his laundry because he found the machines confusing. His endless stream of failed business ideas, the scooter company, the subscription box for dog bow ties, the app that was supposed to be the Uber for houseplants were all hailed as signs of his entrepreneurial spirit. My hard-earned scholarship to a state university was seen as just expected. I learned my role was to be quietly competent and invisible, to never be a burden. His role was to dream, to fail, and to be rescued, time and time again. The college fund wasn't a betrayal to them. It was simply the system working as designed. A system like that doesn't build itself. It needs architects, and the architects of my family were my parents. My father, Martin, was a classic narcissist, though I didn't have the language for it back then. His entire world was a stage, and our family were the actors. He wasn't concerned with whether we were happy, only with whether we were playing our parts convincingly for the audience of neighbors and colleagues. My brother, Dennis, was his perfect leading man, charming, ambitious, and a blank canvas onto which my father could project his own unfulfilled dreams. I, on the other hand, was a disappointment. My quiet competence and independence offered him nothing to boast about, no crisis for him to swoop in and solve. My successes were my own, and therefore they were worthless to him. He needed to be the hero of the story, and my self-sufficiency wrote him out of the script. And then there was my mother, Phyllis. She wasn't the villain. In some ways, she was something far more heartbreaking. She was the enabler. Her life's work was managing my father's fragile ego, keeping the peace at any cost. She was the one who would call me after he'd been cruel, not to comfort me, but to manage my reaction. "Your father is just under a lot of pressure," she'd whisper, making his feelings the priority, and my pain an inconvenience. She was the great silencer of dissent, the keeper of the family's perfect facade. He was the fire, but she was the one who kept feeding it oxygen, sacrificing my needs to keep it from burning her. It's a lonely feeling when the person who is supposed to protect you is the one asking you to endure the pain. If you've ever had to deal with an enabler in your life, someone who chose peace over your protection, just write "I see you" in the comments. You are not alone. So let's go back to that living room, the night they told me about the $80,000. It was late May. The air outside was sweet with the promise of summer, but inside, the atmosphere was cold and sterile. They didn't just tell me the money was gone. They presented it to me in a folder, as if it were a quarterly business report. My father, Martin, cleared his throat and launched into a speech he had clearly rehearsed. He used words like strategic reallocation, long-term family investment, and supporting emerging potential. He spoke about Dennis's scooter company not as a whim, but as the future cornerstone of the family's legacy. He made the theft of my education fund sound like a shrewd, albeit difficult, business decision. There was no apology. There wasn't even a hint of remorse. There was only the expectation that I, as the practical one, would understand the cold logic of it all. I remember my hands going numb as I stared at him. I looked at my mother, searching for an ally, for any flicker of dissent in her eyes. But she just sat there, twisting a napkin in her hands, her expression a tight mask of practiced neutrality. Her silence was her consent. When I finally found my voice, when the words "but," that was from Grandma and Grandpa, came out as a broken whisper, my father's expression hardened. "Don't be sentimental, Vivian," he said, his voice sharp. "Your grandparents would want what's best for the family as a whole." My mother then chose her moment to speak. "You're overreacting, dear," she said softly. "It's not personal, it's just family helping family." And in that moment, the floor fell out from under me. They had not only stolen my money, they had stolen my grief, my memory of my grandparents, and twisted it into a weapon to justify their betrayal. There was no screaming match. There were no tears, not in front of them. To have shown that level of emotion would have been to give them exactly what they wanted, confirmation that I was the dramatic one, the one who was overreacting. Instead, a strange, cold calm washed over me. I saw them for what they were, not as parents, but as architects of a system I could no longer survive in. I simply stood up, said, "I understand," and walked to my room. That night, I packed one suitcase and left. The next few years were the hardest of my life. The acceptance letter from my dream university became a painful souvenir tucked away in a box. I enrolled in a community college and took on 2 jobs. By day, I was serving coffee and burnt toast at a greasy spoon diner, the smell clinging to my clothes. By night, I was an invisible ghost in the vast aisles of a big box store, stocking shelves from midnight to 6 in the morning, fueled by cheap energy drinks. My parents, of course, framed my struggle as a character-building exercise they had generously provided. My father would tell his friends, "Vivian is really finding her independence." We believe in teaching our kids the value of $1. My mother would call me, her voice syrupy with false concern, asking why I wasn't at Sunday dinner, reminding me how much Dennis missed me. They wanted me to show up and play my part, to pretend their betrayal was a lesson and not a theft. It was the final, sickening realization. They were not just ignoring my pain, they were capitalizing on it. So, one day, I just stopped. I didn't send an angry email or a dramatic letter. I simply blocked their numbers. I stopped opening the door. I disappeared. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of survival. It was the only way to stop the bleeding. The silence that followed was deafening at first. Years of conditioning had taught me that their presence, however toxic, was a constant. Its absence felt like a missing limb. But slowly, I started to fill that silence not with noise, but with purpose. My life became a quiet, relentless montage of rebuilding. Those 2 years of community college became my foundation, every credit earned feeling like a victory. I transferred to the University of Washington's architecture program, not my original dream school, but a dream I resurrected from the ashes with my own 2 hands. I graduated with honors and a mountain of student loan debt that felt more like a badge of honor than a burden. At least this, I thought, was mine. I took a junior drafter position at a large firm in Seattle and poured everything I had into it. My world shrank to the size of my drafting table. While my peers were out socializing, I was in the office late, studying blueprints, learning project management software, and absorbing every piece of knowledge I could. Every paycheck was a brick in the fortress I was building around myself, a fortress of financial independence. I was determined to create a life so stable, so secure, that no one could ever have that kind of power over me again. After 5 years of grinding, of working 80-hour weeks and living in a tiny studio apartment that barely fit my bed, I saved enough to take the biggest risk of my life. I started my own firm, Vivian Sterling Design. It was just me, a rented desk, and a second-hand laptop, but it was a kingdom. If you have ever had to fight for your own worth, clawing your way up from a place you were never supposed to leave, know that this space is for you. Subscribe and join a community of people who understand that the quietest work often builds the strongest foundations. But building a fortress can be a lonely business. For years, I believed that radical self-sufficiency was the only way to be safe. I built walls so high to keep the pain out that I didn't realize they were also keeping connection out. But the funny thing about life is that when you create a vacuum, something will eventually fill it. And while I had walked away from the family I was born into, a new one was quietly, patiently forming around me. It wasn't a family bound by blood, but by choice and mutual respect. I call them my chosen family. There was Professor Albright, my cantankerous but brilliant mentor from the university. He saw the fire in my work when I just felt the exhaustion in my bones. He was the one who wrote scathing letters of recommendation that got me interviews and who, once a month, would buy me a coffee and grill me about my business plan, playing the part of the tough but supportive father I never had. There was Maya, my best friend from those brutal community college days. She was the one who would show up at my tiny office at 10 p.m. with takeout, refusing to leave until I ate. She left her stable job to become my first employee, my partner in crime. And there were the Garcias, my first big clients, an older couple who hired me to design their retirement home. They didn't just hire a designer, they adopted a daughter, inviting me to their own holidays, celebrating my small wins as if they were their own. These people didn't demand a role from me. Their love wasn't transactional. It was a quiet, steady presence that slowly dismantled my walls, brick by brick. With the steady foundation of my chosen family beneath me, I was no longer just building a fortress. I was building an empire. I started taking on bigger, more ambitious projects, my confidence growing with each one. Then, the opportunity of a lifetime arrived, disguised as an anonymous design competition. The brief was to design a modern, sustainable mountain retreat for a private client. Fueled by years of pent-up creativity, I poured my entire soul into the proposal. I designed a house that wasn't just built on the land but seemed to grow out of it a structure of glass, reclaimed cedar, and dark steel that blurred the line between indoors and nature. It was a sanctuary, everything I had craved for myself. A month later, I got a call. The client, a notoriously reclusive tech billionaire, had personally chosen my design out of hundreds of submissions from much larger, more prestigious firms. He said I was the only one who understood that true luxury wasn't about size, but about silence and peace. That single contract was worth more than my firm had made in the 3 previous years combined. I remember sitting in my small office, the phone still pressed to my ear long after he'd hung up, and just crying. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. It was the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had made it. It was validation on a scale I had never dreamed of, proof that cutting away the dead weight of my past was the only way I could have ever learned to fly. We all have that one moment, that turning point where the struggle finally starts to pay off. Think about yours for a second. What time is it for you right now, wherever you are? If you're comfortable, share that moment in the comments below. Let's fill this space with our victories, big and small. The following year was a blur of blueprints, site visits, and creative energy. The mountain retreat became my masterpiece. Working with the client, this brilliant man who valued privacy and beauty above all else, was a dream. We weren't just building a house, we were creating a piece of art together. As the final touches were being put on the home in early November, he called me. He knew fragments of my story, of my struggle. "Vivian," he said, "a house isn't a home until it's filled with happy memories. I won't be moving in until after the new year. I want the first memory in this place to be yours. Please, use it for Thanksgiving. Consecrate it with joy." I was floored by his generosity. My initial thought was to have a small, quiet dinner there with Maya and Professor Albright. But then, as I stood on the heated stone terrace, looking out at the Cascade Mountains, a different idea began to form. It started not as a plan for revenge, but as an overwhelming wave of gratitude. I thought of the people who had stood by me, the Garcias, my professor, Maya, my first few employees who believed in me when the firm was just a desk and a laptop. A simple dinner didn't feel like enough. They deserved more. They deserved a celebration as grand as the victory we had all, in our own ways, achieved. That's when the idea truly sparked. We'd take photos at the mountain house, yes. But the real celebration? That would happen somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Somewhere they would never expect. And if my parents happened to see it? Well, that would just be the quiet, satisfying postscript to a story that was no longer about them. And so, the trap was set. This brings us back to Thanksgiving morning, to my parents' quiet house and the glowing screen of my mother's phone. The photos they were seeing had been taken the weekend before. I had gathered my chosen family at the now famous mountain retreat for what I called a pre-Thanksgiving celebration. We hired a chef, popped champagne, and spent a day creating the perfect illusion. The first photo they saw was the wide shot, all 10 of us at a grand dining table, laughing, the majestic peak of Mount Rainier visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass behind us. Then, a portrait of me, raising a glass, a calm, knowing smile on my face that held no trace of the broken 18-year-old they'd left behind. Then candid shots of Maya and I laughing, of Professor Albright carving the turkey, of the Garcias holding hands. I know exactly how my father would have reacted. It wouldn't have been simple jealousy. It would have been a narcissistic claim. He would have seen my success and immediately thought, "She gets that from me. Look what our daughter accomplished." He wouldn't have seen it as something I built in spite of him, but as a direct result of his tough love. He would have felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by a surge of rage at not being present to take credit for it. In his mind, he was the producer of this grand movie, and I had foolishly barred him from the premiere. They were seeing a world of warmth and success, and their only thought would be, how do we get inside? It's a strange kind of pain when people who abandoned you in the trenches suddenly want to show up for the victory parade. If you know what that feels like, if you've had people try to claim a success they had no part in, type, "I earned this" in the comments. Because you did. I can picture the scene in their living room perfectly. After the initial shock of the photos, their narcissistic logic would have kicked in. They wouldn't have felt shame or regret. They would have felt offended. How dare I celebrate a victory without my creators present to receive their due credit? My father, Martin, would have been the first to act. "This is absurd," he'd announce, standing up as if making a boardroom decision. "She's obviously just being dramatic, looking for attention. Well, we'll give it to her." We'll be the bigger people. My mother, ever the dutiful, second in command, would have readily agreed. You're right, dear. She probably wants us to call. She's likely just waiting for us to make the first move. They would have manufactured a narrative in which they were the gracious, forgiving parents, and I was the petulant child waiting to be brought back into the fold. Then the call would have come. My father's number flashing on a screen he couldn't know was thousands of miles away. He wouldn't have left a message at first. He would have expected me to pick up immediately. When I didn't, he'd try again. Then he'd pass the phone to my mother, who would begin her campaign of frantic, pleading calls. The texts would follow. First, a single, commanding message from my father. Vivian. Saw the pictures. Call me with the address. Then, my mother's guilt-laden follow-ups. Please call back, sweetie. Don't ruin Thanksgiving for everyone. Finally, the inevitable text from my brother, Dennis, after they'd called him to complain. Seriously, Viv? Just tell them where you are. Mom is all worked up. Stop making everything about you. The beautiful irony was that for the first time in my life, I was doing exactly that. I was making it about me. And my silence was the loudest answer I could possibly give. By evening, I imagine their anger had hardened into a bitter, self-righteous narrative. They would have convinced themselves that I was the cruel one, the monster who had deliberately flaunted my happiness to hurt them on a family holiday. They would have told themselves they were the victims. And as they sat in their silent house, nursing their wounded pride, a final notification would have lit up my mother's phone. It would be an Instagram story from me. It wouldn't be a lavish photo, but a quiet, simple video. A short clip of 10 ceramic teacups gently clinking together over a wooden table, steam rising in the cool morning air. The caption would read, "Thankful for a peaceful morning with the family." At first, they'd be confused. Morning? It was evening in Seattle. Then their eyes would drift upwards to the little line of text at the top of the screen, the feature they, in their social media illiteracy, had probably never paid much attention to. The geotag. And it wouldn't say Seattle, or Washington, or anywhere in America. It would say, in crisp, undeniable letters, Arashiyama, Bamboo Grove, Kyoto, Japan. That would be the moment. The true moment of impact. The instant the entire narrative they had constructed would shatter. I wasn't an hour away, ignoring their calls. I was on the other side of the world, a day ahead of them, living a life so far removed from their orbit they couldn't even comprehend it. The Mountain House party wasn't the event. It was the invitation for them to watch the show. A show whose finale revealed they were never even in the audience. The world may never understand the quiet battles you've fought, but we do. Subscribe if these stories speak your truth, and let's create a space where our realities are finally seen. After that final Instagram story from Kyoto, a new kind of silence began. This time, it was from their end. The angry texts stopped. The pleading phone calls ceased. For a narcissist like my father, a dramatic confrontation is a stage. My anger, my tears, my accusations that would all be fuel. It would give him a role to play, the misunderstood father, the unfairly judged patriarch. It would give my mother a crisis to manage, a reason to plead for a peace that only ever served them. My refusal to engage, my physical and emotional distance, gave them nothing. I didn't just deny them a seat at my table, I dismantled the entire theater. I never blocked their numbers. I never blocked them on social media. I believe that would have been a gift, a dramatic final act that would have given them a grievance to cling to. Instead, I did something far crueler. I demoted them. They went from being the tyrannical rulers of my small world to being insignificant, silent spectators of my much larger one. They were now just followers. They could watch as my firm won a prestigious design award. They could see the photos from my trip to Italy with Maya. They could see the birthday party the Garcias threw for me. They had a front row seat to a life filled with joy, success, and love, a life that had been built not just without them, but in direct defiance of the future they had planned for me. There was no cathartic, movie-ending showdown. There was only their slow, dawning realization that they were no longer main characters in my story. They had become footnotes. And for a narcissist, there is no greater punishment than irrelevance. People hear this story and some call it a masterpiece of family revenge. And I understand why. There is a certain cold satisfaction in it. But the truth is, the plan was never truly about them. It was about me. The ultimate goal wasn't to cause them pain, but to celebrate the fact that I was finally free of mine. For years, Thanksgiving had been a day of dread, a painful reminder of the family table I wasn't truly welcome at. I decided to reclaim it. The real victory wasn't the look on their faces when they saw the geotag from Kyoto. It was the feeling of peace I felt standing in the bamboo grove, the crisp November air filling my lungs, surrounded by the easy, uncomplicated love of my chosen family. That trip taught me the true meaning of gratitude. I learned that you can be grateful for the scars. I'm grateful for the betrayal because it was the catalyst that forced me to save myself. I'm grateful for the lonely years because they taught me a resilience I never knew I had. And I am eternally grateful for the people who showed me that family isn't about the blood you share, but about the people who show up for you, who respect you, and who celebrate your light without trying to stand in it. The real revenge wasn't the happiness they saw on Instagram. The real revenge was the profound, unshakable happiness I felt in my own heart in a moment where they didn't even cross my mind. It was the realization that I had built a table so full of love and respect, there simply wasn't any room left for them. It's been a few years since that Thanksgiving in Kyoto. My life today is quiet, full, and profoundly peaceful. My firm is thriving, and my chosen family continues to be my anchor. People sometimes ask me if I've forgiven them, and I've come to understand that forgiveness is a complicated word. If forgiveness means letting them back into my life, pretending the past didn't happen, then the answer is no. Some doors, once closed, need to stay closed for the health of the person who lives inside. But if forgiveness means letting go of the weight of my anger, releasing the bitterness from my own heart so that I can be free, then yes, I have. My forgiveness was never for them. It was for me. It was the final act of reclaiming my own inner peace. Justice and karma, I've learned, are often not loud, cinematic events. They are quiet, inevitable consequences. My parents' punishment was not my revenge. It was the empty house they created for themselves, the silence on the other end of the phone, the life they can only watch from a distance. They sowed betrayal and they reaped irrelevance. The greatest lesson in all of this is that you are the ultimate author of your own life. You cannot choose the family you are born into, but you can choose the family you build. You can choose to honor your own worth, even when, especially when, those who are supposed to love you most do not. The most profound justice is not in seeing others fall, but in having the courage to rise, to build a life so beautiful and strong, it becomes impervious to the shadows of the past. Thank you for holding space for my story today. If you believe in the right to build your own table and write your own happy ending, subscribe to this channel. Let's continue to share these journeys together, and always remember that your value is never up for negotiation.